Well, folks, this is going to be a great Leading Your Best Life podcast because I'm with an educator, a person whose whole life has been committed to education, an old mate and a swimming coach as well. Luke George, how are you, mate?
Oh, really well, thanks, Leigh. How are you?
Good, mate. What I wanted to do is delve down into leading your best life, but as an educator looking to make a difference to education systems, but at the same time, educational leadership and what you've been doing to really make waves in a very positive way in that regard. So, Luke, before we get into the education stuff, let's let the people know what has been Luke George's journey. Where has Luke George come from? Where's he evolved from?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think leaders reflect, Leigh, and I think as we've grown, I've done a lot of reflection, and so that's a pretty easy question for me to look to answer. So I would look back in my life as an 8-year-old child, telling my year 2 teacher that I wanted to be a teacher. I just
Really?
loved education already. I used to have these visions of what the classroom would look like, whether they're all going to be in rows and things like that. And I pretty well had a really good focus on what to do and what I was going to do with my life, which really helped. So I went to Teachers College, and my first posting as a 21-year-old from the western suburbs to the western desert was Halls Creek District High School back in the early 80s.
Sounds like Wake in Fright, mate. They made a movie about that, didn't they?
I think there was a Wolf Creek Crater, which I actually stayed at prior to the movie, thank goodness, otherwise it wouldn't have gone out. But look, that was actually a fantastic introduction to education. I had an amazing principal. I learned standards, I learned culture, and I believe that's I've really taken a lot of that with me as I've moved forward. So I guess I will get into that later on, but at some stage, after about 7 or 8 years, I just made a decision to move on and just sort of see what else I could do in life. And since then, I've started from zero to sold 3 businesses, and this is pretty well the passion of where I'm sitting right now. So is that the sort of background you want, or do you want to delve even deeper?
Well, I know that you're a swimmer. You've done a lot of swimming because you and I play water polo against each other, and then you coached me in swimming, making me do those 1,500-meter time trials just to see how I could go. And so, mate, so clearly, as you say, you got an incredible passion for teaching. I mean, I think when we met, the business you had was in and around analyzing data in regard to some of the standardized testing that was done. What was that business about?
Yeah, so that business was looking at data that was coming out commercially, NatBand data, and then myself and my original business partner, we sort of said and looked at, well, it's all very well having the information, but how can we get it into educators' hands and make a difference for the little people? And so pretty well between us, we designed and created software, and that's still going today. So yeah, that was a great entry into really helping schools and teachers understand data and make a difference in classrooms.
Right. And since then, I know you've got involved with the School of Positive Psychology. You've been doing things in that regard. In fact, why don't we do that and just go to your website and just show the people what you're up to here. By George, courageous educators, courageous culture, courageous speakers, courageous leaders. Tell us a bit about this. What's this all about?
Yeah, look, it really started after selling that previous business and moving into, what am I going to do next? What was my purpose? And it still came, this education still remained very strongly within myself. And it actually started off with me going off and doing a positive psychology diploma, and then just coming back and saying, you know what, this is what teachers need. At the moment, it's the teaching profession is one of the highest industries where people leave because of stress. And we pretty well all know the story about where teachers are. So we started down in that area. And then while I was working in that place, I then looked into, it's actually more about culture and how can we help a school go from a negative culture to a positive culture, and to make it so teachers and educators feel safe, heard, valued, and appreciated. From that space, when you get around, you're starting to talking to people. I sort of looked into more of, well, what about our leaders? Because we have a lot of leadership in schools. How can we help them? And I created the Courageous Leaders space, and that's working with team leaders to make a difference with their teams, because that's pretty necessary for if you're going to help the little people in your charge, in your classroom. How can we get that middle management and bring them up to speed so they can move from confused to courageous? So it's been, I suppose, a bit organic, but as we move through this podcast, you'll find out, the way I sort of think and why I can move into these sort of spaces. But let me be very clear. I have a conviction for young people progressing. So every student matters, which is a quote from John Hattie. And I believe that if we have teachers and educators that are distracted in front of little people, then those little people won't get 100%. So it's all about being the best version of yourself more often. And if there's anything I can do to help in that space, I'm going to be there.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, as we say, performance equals potential minus interference. And so if there's a whole lot of admin or stress interference, then the educator, the teacher, can't be the best teacher that they can be. And my understanding is that it seems to be more and more admin stress being placed on teachers, let alone all of the other issues. And I can see you've been very busy. And I know when I see you on LinkedIn, there's all sorts of great articles and other bits and pieces you've got there. You're very active. So well done, mate. So let's talk about what you've seen in terms of best practice. Because clearly, I imagine you have to have the principal being 100% on side. If the principal's not on side, then that would be difficult. So what are some of the best practice things you've seen where you've made a difference? And at the same time, I suppose, where have there been handbrakes or things that have gone wrong? So if an educational leader wants to change their culture or create a better learning environment or better school, what are some of the tips you'd give them?
Yeah, that's a good question, Leigh. But I believe one of the things is if we're looking just at the business side is to actually listen to the customer or the client and see where they're at. So I do a lot of work beforehand, just in curiosity, asking the questions. It's no use trying to come in and see that the answer sits here, but they're still thinking there. So that conversation is had. And then what I do is I notice that, rightio, well, look, I understand this is where I think you should be, but let's just start at where you actually know where you are at. And depending on that space is where we delve a little bit deeper. So, for instance, it might be just a conversation about a caring principle looking at well-being. They feel they've got their culture and their leadership's already sorted. And if that's the space, let's work with that. Because absolutely, if we can reduce the stress and restore balance in teachers' lives, that's a great start. But then there would be another conversation where I have with someone that's really wanting to move their whole team forward. And they see the opportunity to have team leaders involved. And so rather than educators coming to principals, which can take up a lot of time, is what we do is we put in a really nice, create a nice space for team leaders. And I create a space for team leaders to be courageous leaders. And so when they are working closer with their team, then it sort of takes away from the principal and the other administrators that they have to get involved. So basically what we're doing is just stretching that conduit of information. So we empower our team leaders, and that works really well. But then the next level above that is they've got great team leaders. They seem to get a Drucker that said culture eats strategy for breakfast every day. And I feel that that's a really important part. So the research so what we do with team leaders, so the principal may feel as if the well-being is not the area of concern. It might be just getting a really good team leader structure put in place. And when I mean like team leaders, that's where you'd have maybe a group of year 1, 2s together, but it has to be led by someone. And that someone at the moment, Leigh, to tell you the truth, might be the person that's been the most experienced or the person that's been at the school the longest, but they don't necessarily have leadership qualities and skill set. So let's get them being and upskilling those people and moving them from confused leaders to courageous leaders. So you get this nice space. So rather than always the admin getting hammered by every question from an educator, we actually have a barrier there that actually helps answer some of those pretty critical questions that need answers straight away.
And what does a courageous leader look like in the educational environment as far as you're concerned?
Yep. Look, a courageous leader in my space is someone that can handle the difficult conversations, handle accountability. So let me just picture this, Leigh. If I was the year 2 leader for my year 2 group, of which there might be 4 teachers, I could be in the staff room with them at lunchtime having a chat, like we're getting along. But then when we need to get into a meeting situation and start talking about data and start getting accountability, well, I get confused because, we're sort of still friends. We've got to move you from what I call confused peer and up into a courageous leader that can actually have that conversation and be more effective and move them through those barriers. So then the next level, as you asked, just the last piece, is just all about culture. And that's where we come into Peter Drucker's great quote about culture eats strategy for breakfast every day. And that's really the pinnacle of a school environment or any organisation, as you dare say I would work with, Leigh. And it's about what I call the 4 VASH, which is making people feel valued, make them feel accepted and safe and heard. And if you can get that happening, then everything will flow underneath. In fact, Dr. John Hattie's just come out of Perth with a conference where he actually started with, it's about school culture. And for him to say that's pretty high regard.
Okay. So, and who was at that conference? Were they principals or teachers, or who were they?
Interesting enough, it was all about the Centre of Excellence Schools and the development for aspiring leaders, I think.
Great, mate. Well, let's say leadership is everything. We say the speed of the group is determined by the speed of the leader. The fish stinks from the head first. And of course, sometimes in a lot of cases, those principals they've left high school, gone to university, gone from university to teaching, and ended up in a leadership position. In fact, I think that's where the Peter principle was first discussed. Was person becomes a teacher, becomes head of department, and then eventually they're vice principal, then all of a sudden they're principal, but they've had little or no leadership training other than they've been able to survive in those leadership positions. I certainly know my wife had suffered, endured, put up with, worked with a whole range of different principles of different leadership abilities. And as in businesses, sometimes people think because they've got the name director or managing director or principal on their business card, they've automatically got the skills that go with it. And it's like, well, what right have you got to question me, mate? Haven't you seen my business card? Haven't you seen the title on it? Versus, well, hang on, how much actual personal development have you done in terms of, as you say, listening, being courageous, looking at data, running meetings, having discussions where people are held accountable, or at least or performance review, and not done it in such a bullying way where you think you're some kind of football coach from 1957. So what are some of the things you teach them there, Luke, to help become better leaders?
Yeah, so I pretty well use a model. So the very first thing is conviction. you've got to start with conviction, and that conviction is going to drive you forward. And with that conviction, it's about having a couple of pieces that sit underneath that. So you've got to know your documentation. Why are you doing that? You've got to have a mindset. You've got to have relationships, and you've also got to have a purpose. Why are we doing this? And that question needs to come up every time. The second part of the model is about curiosity. Let's be more curious rather than getting all upset about someone's personality, that they haven't quite thinking the same as you, or you haven't met their expectation. Get to understand where they are. The beautiful quote from Stephen Covey about seek to understand. So be curious. And the last one is actually being courageous. Being courageous to make a decision, to move forward, and then it comes back to our conviction. I have a quote that I start with, a metaphor for all of my leaders, and it's pretty well: a courageous leader is like a lighthouse, shining the pathway for others, regardless of the weather conditions. Because when it's really calm, leadership is easy. But it's when we're in a storm is when it gets a bit harder, and it's having those skills that actually really does create the courageous leader that we can all be.
Absolutely. Talking of calm and storm, mate, of course, as you know, the weekend, the solo swim to Rottnest, where certainly it needed leadership. Heidi, my skipper, was fantastic because the seas were certainly rough in that swim at the weekend. Were you out in the waters or not?
I was feeling for you, Leigh. I was feeling for you.
Oh, mate. Well, I said if I was having trouble, there'd be a few others having a bit more trouble. And sure enough, it was carnage down the back there, between people falling off kayaks and hypothermia. And as I say, you've got to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think a lot of the people who'd done training in the pools, when it came time to hitting rough water, had not acclimatized to that situation. But let's just go a couple of steps further. From your point of view, what do you see in the past, having had all this experience in education? What are some of the things that stop schools being as successful and having the cultures that they should have? What are some of the blockers, the handbrakes that stop it?
Yeah. Look, I think the very first thing I want to say is that the department, and I work in the public, I work with public schools. It just seems to be an area that I seem to have a lot of contact with. But the department puts out a lot of leadership, and they're good at that sort of thing. So it's not to say that they're not doing or not trying their best. But let's get back to the breaks, etc. Look, when it comes down to it, Leigh, and you were just saying a minute ago about professional development and how you lead yourself. So there are some personal barriers. So, for instance, am I good enough? Now, I've arrived in this space, and as you just said, from teacher to educator and all the way up. So I've come up this journey, and I've arrived in this chair, and there's a lot of things going on. So there's a lot of chaos going on. And I can feel that if you haven't got that self-belief and that conviction and that curiosity and courage, it can get pretty overwhelming. So what do we do with that is we start looking around at what other people are doing. And basically, I've just seen that we just either do what other people do because that seems like a good idea, or we do what we've always done because it worked in the last school. And what we're not doing is really listening to the feedback that the educators are giving us. And I think that would be the very first break, is actually not listening, and that curiosity about the people that you're leading and taking that feedback and saying, what does that mean to me? And don't take it personally. Actually look at your conviction, which is about helping little people progress. And I'll just put a little interjection there why that's so important, is that a report came out 2 weeks ago from Gallup saying that nearly 30% of students can't read or aren't reading to their age. That's 8 out of 24 children. Now, that is not good enough in my book. So that's showing something's going wrong. And I can tell you, Leigh, hand on heart, it is not about the programs that we're using. It's about the culture and be able to design it so educators can do the job of plan, teach, and assess. Sounds easy, but it takes courage to be able to move all the rubbish out of the way and just focus in on what's important. And you do that by listening and being curious. I'd say the other barrier to moving forward is being aware. Just simply being aware that you're not hitting the markers that you want, or having the goals that you've set for yourself. Just being aware that you're not quite reaching the pinnacle of where you want to be. Because as you know, the first step to actually moving forward is you've got to be aware. And that's why we work a lot on reflection, which is curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those two would be pretty strong: listening and awareness.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, therefore, that means you want to be open, as a leader, to be open to the feedback, as distinct from being closed and being a know-it-all. You know, we talk about, are you a learn-it-all? Are you a learn-it-all or a know-it-all? And so if we talk about what you've observed over the years in terms of good routines or good systems that a high-performing school would be using versus systems and processes and routines that a poor performing school would use, what would be a couple of things that you would see there in terms of the differences, systems and routines?
Yeah. Systems and routines. Look, I'll just give you two examples of that. As I was saying before about being reflective and observant and really focusing on what your purpose is. So I've been at schools like, for instance, we all remember the assembly, right? So assemblies, we've been doing assemblies for 1,000 years. Children get up, do their assembly item. It takes a lot of effort to do that, may I add. There's a lot of time that goes into that. And then there's, parents come around and it's a sing-song, and we do one every fortnight, for instance. But it takes a lot of energy and time. So it's interesting that we then say, well, what's that all about? Now, there's a school the other day that said, we're not doing that anymore. They actually said, we're not going to do more, we're going to do less. And because it was another thing that they were doing, and they were actually asking themselves, how does this improve student performance? And so now what they do is that school just does 4 assemblies, Anzac Day, 2 musics, and the graduation. Now you can imagine that's just taken a couple of hours off each teacher from doing all of that work and putting it into more performance-based work. So just looking at your systems, and analysing each one of them, just saying, how does this work? So that would be one. The other one that I've seen in a what we call a Centre of Excellence school is having very clear expectations of educators and students and administration. So the directions are crystal clear. There is no ambiguity behind what's possible. And what that does is the conversations are now easier, because if someone's sort of veering off or outside those expectations, it's an easy conversation to bring them back and be curious and ask the question. Why did you veer across? What was that all about? And do you understand where we're trying to get? Let's get back onto that same pathway. And the third part is, if you are going to change the expectations, everybody's involved, everybody's agreed, and it takes an actual process. And I'd then reverse that and then say, I've seen schools where the principals come in, got rid of all of that, and then just said, we're doing it my way. That school, every time, it's just died.
Certainly one of the principles we work on in change management is we say involvement equals ownership equals commitment. So if you want people committed to a change program or an initiative, you've got to get them involved in the creation of it. And of course, the autocrat comes in who somehow has modeled themselves on something out of, 2000 BC, and thinks that it's on my business card. I'm in the chair. You'll do as I say. It's like, and of course, transactional analysis. You behave as the parent. The rest of them are going to behave as children. We want adult to adult relationships with the team members in the place. And of course, the other side of it is, and having watched my own kids gone through school, is that in many ways you're playing to two audiences. You're playing to the audience, well, three really. One, the students in the class. Two,
Yes.
your peers and colleagues. And three, the parents. And parents can make life very good or bad for you, I'm sure, whether you're a principal or a teacher. So an awareness of how do I actually work with all of those, because certainly I know my wife working at various schools, there seem to be a whole lot of staff politics that can go on. And it's almost like sometimes the staff room might be worse than the schoolyard in terms of some of the behaviours and the politics going on. So the principal, talking about coming back to cultural eat strategies for breakfast any day, is that the principal go, how do I deal with that culture? And we talked into the leader sets the tone. And again, we're getting heaps of feedback from my wife over the years, and some of the behaviours of the leaders were just like, what is going on there in terms of integrity, setting standards, listening, all of those things. And the note I've made over here is, because NLP says, well, let's model best practice. So whether it be best practice within Australia or best practice outside of Australia, what have you seen because we hear about Finland and some of the Scandinavian countries and some of the practices, obviously in Asia as well. What are some of the practices that you've seen in terms of world's best practice that you're attempting to bring in to the schools that you work with?
Look, I'll be honest that I haven't seen anything overseas that I've said, wow, I'm going to bring that in. But there are a couple of comments that I can make about their systems. And pretty well, I've already mentioned one of them. They're very clear. And you just mentioned about the staff room. I can only have politics when I'm uncertain. When I am certain, then I know what my conversation would look like. And those systems are very clear of what they look like. But I'd say that best practice from overseas and around us is actually a great place to start. So a lot of the times and I'm saying this from an opinion only, but we may model ourselves on the English system or the American system. And you'll see programs come out from America about a reading program, etc., which now has just been changed because it's all about the science of reading, not the current system that's been in place for a long time. Now, maybe we should be looking around what is Finland doing, what is Sweden doing, what is the Asian market doing. But I'd say there'd be two things that we could do straight away. That if anyone, when parents ask me about education and that social area, is number one is that those communities actually put teachers equal to the space of a doctor or a lawyer, or they're revered. Because they know that educators are the most important. Let's educate them. They don't talk about much more. They're obviously surviving, but let's educate them. Let's get schools. Let's get that sort of thing happening. So we really need to elevate that sort of space and really respect our educators. And that then leads me to the second point, is that as much as, yes, parents are important, they are not the policy makers. Parents are partners in education, not policymakers. So when I hear about parents having an opinion and then education changing because of that opinion, that annoys me, because the experts in the room, i.e. the educators, they know exactly about how they're working. So it'd just be like you going to see the doctor, seeing the doctor, and then coming back and after reading Google, telling him or her how what's wrong and they're wrong. Well, we don't for some reason accept that. But in education, we have this. We created this space where parents can just rock on up and just start saying what's wrong with Johnny or what's wrong with other teachers. And then everybody gets involved and we've got to quieten them all down. Well, that all takes time. So we need to just put a very blanket just saying, hey, involvement is fine. These are the times you can meet with me. But if you've got a complaint, let's just tone it all down a little bit. And in those foreign countries, that is exactly how they treat parents, because parents revere educators, not see them as a spot that they can control, because it isn't. Educators are very talented people.
Absolutely.
So that'll be the two.
Well, certainly, you know, there's an extreme person that you and I both know that because of his own bad experience at school has great disdain for teachers, and it's like, you know, I'm paying you to make my son be able to be wealthy, and I'll put you in your place, and it's the complete opposite. And I think that's not so uncommon. Certainly in these western suburbs. So let's just go to a couple of things around your own mentoring. By the way, just in terms of you're sparking memories in me, because we did a lot of work out at Curtin University in both the School of Business and the School of Accounting in terms of looking to improve the education experience out there, bringing in business principles around, you know, and tapping in on the collective brain power. So we made some great changes there. And I don't know if you know, Dr. Grant Donovan came out of Human Movement Studies Department. He and I did a lot of work with TAFE in New South Wales. In fact, pretty much every major TAFE, we went through a whole program of innovation and innovation leadership, particularly as TAFE needed to become more market focused, become more innovative in their programs. Some of the programs, I remember up in Newcastle at one stage, they called the TAFE in Newcastle the Returned Servicemen's Club, because it was essentially guys that had been to the Second World War and had trades, didn't want to go back out and be tradespeople, and ended up, you know, teaching plumbing or painting or panel beating, and nothing much had changed since about 1945 up there. But you know, over time we facilitated a whole lot of change right across the TAFE system in New South Wales. But let's talk about coaching and mentoring for you. Can you recall some key coaching conversations or mentoring conversations that people had with you that helped shape your attitude and paradigms and directions in life? Usually, often at times, people have, you know, could have been a sporting coach or a teacher or a lecturer. Give me an example or two of people that have made an impact on you in terms of your thinking and your movement forward in life.
Yeah, it's a good question, and my reflection on it is, and I'm sort of going to go in a bit of a space here, that when my father left, divorced when I was a young guy, about 9 years old, I didn't have that father figure around, so I actually learned just to pretty well survive and create my own energies moving forward. And it wasn't until that very first space in my very first posting at Halls Creek District High School that I met a principal, Peter McLeod, RIP, a magnificent man for me at the age of 21 years old. So he taught me about standards. He taught me about being on time and being reliable. Your word is 100%. And it was interesting because that came also from my grandfather, who was a fantastic businessman. And to the extent that I remember the movie, walking into a staff room, and I was only 2 minutes late, and everybody was there. Obviously, you know, I didn't really know the deal. And Peter McLeod, he just said, "George, what's the deal?" And I just sort of, you know, what do you mean? He said, "You're 2 minutes late, multiplied by the 40 people in this room, that's 80 minutes worth of energy that you've just consumed. So I hope you enjoyed that. Now sit down." Well, I've never been late for a meeting again. In fact, I've always been early. Now, when I tell this story, people go, "Oh, geez, Luke, what did you feel like?" For me, it was like, great. I know where it is. I know how it works. I'm clear. And it's interesting the way that people would see that as an offensive thing, whereas I saw it as, okay, this is the standard you need to meet. This is what I have to do. So that'll be my first encounter. Now, looking back on all the sort of people that are into my lives, I've never had a formal mentor, but I'll get to that in a minute. But what I've really looked at Andrea Clark's book, Future Fit, and she talks about that whole area of your board of directors. And so I've got some really good people around me where I can have an easy conversation.
Mate, sorry, it dropped out there where you said you'd never had a formal mentor. So come back to that. Sorry, I don't know why it's dropping out of mine. I've dropped it. I've gone to another internet source at my end here, but yeah, you never had a formal mentor.
Yeah, so I've never had a real formal mentor, and but what I've had is a lot of experience of people around me, and it was only about sort of 10 years ago after reading Andrea Clark's book Future Fit, and she talked about the board of directors, and that really started, made me really think about the people around me, and as my grandfather said, it was all about surround yourself by winners, Luke, people that want to move you forward. So you have the cheerleader, you have the capitalist for your finance, you have your confidant, and then also you have your coach. So what I find is now I've got really good people where I can just pick up the phone and I can have a conversation about this is where I'm at. And they are also someone that will challenge you. So that would be what I've created, for me. But where I started this conversation about, my fatherly figure not being there, and of which we've had a discussion. So please, anyone, don't get all upset. I still love my father and we love each other and we have conversations. But what I have found is getting advice is so important. And if you don't have someone around you, get a coach. Get someone and have someone in your life that will challenge you, that will make you think about your decisions. It is so important. So from that, and I know you do mentoring in that space there, Leigh, and sometimes it's online, etc. And I actually joined up with a group called Thought Leaders Business School, run by a chap by Matt Church. Now, this is my first entry. So this is my first entry into this space. I hadn't really been in a community like that, and I got a lot out of it. They really started making me think that I didn't have the only way, that there were other ways to do things. And that was a massive help. So I encourage anyone, if you're thinking about or wondering about or tried maybe someone who didn't quite work, don't give up. Surround yourself by people that will take you to where you want to go. But more importantly, get a coach, have someone in your back pocket, because I believe that's pretty important.
Fantastic, mate. And just on that, we're talking about the evolution and the ongoing growth of Luke George. What motivates you, Luke, and why does it motivate you?
I think there's it comes down to my first word of leadership is about conviction. You've got to be passionate about something, and maybe passionate is a bit of a strong word, but people seem to understand passion. So my motivation is to really live life. To tell you the truth, Leigh, when when my mind's still working and I can look back at my life, I just want to say to myself, I enjoyed every minute of it. I want to say to myself that I contributed to the world. I might have even left a bit of a legacy. And the only way you can do that is to have a bit of a mantra for me. So I've got a lot of habits, I've got a lot of routines I go through, so I will complete that. But one of my first things, and you may ask me this question, but I just thought it might be pertinent, is with well-being, it's pretty well 20% of it is physical. What are you doing physically to create a space that your brain engages and you get to think, and your heart starts ticking over so you can do this stuff every day. And so it's all about, I go to the gym, I swim, I ride, just so I can surf more. And that was my number one. I've got to be able to surf more. And Kelly Slater once said, you don't grow old. You don't stop surfing when you grow old. you grow old when you stop surfing. So I'm just going to keep having a good crack at it. But you can't do that unless you do all the work beforehand. So each morning I do an hour of something, I do cross training, etc. But my very start, I have two things I do each day. And the very start of my morning, it's all about sunrise select. So when the sun gets up, what sort of day are you going to have? I'm going to have a fantastic day. Every day is unreal. I'm going to get all these things done that I want to do that's going to make a difference and contribute. Of an evening, it's all about sunset reflect. So how did that day go? Did you tick things off? Did you make that contribution? And some days, Leigh, I don't get through it all, and that's all right. But the things that I was doing, I felt that was good, and I was creating that space and following those goals. So the motivation is just to get up. Life is a fantastic place to be. I looked at I remember Tim Ferriss's book 4 Hours 4 Hour Working Week, and he was just talking about if you're going to read stuff, don't read rubbish that's of no significance to your life. Read stuff that's going to create and so you can reach your goals. So newspapers, news articles, watching ABC News, it just isn't part of my scope. I sort of flick through to sort of get a little bit of information, but to tell you the truth, Leigh, the important stuff for me is to be able to talk about what are we going to be doing next? How do I help people? Because that's actually what I get a kick out of. And at the moment, as you know, if you turned on the news and you sort of took it all on board, I don't think you'd get out of bed. And that's something I do not want to do.
Yeah, you get depressed over it. So just on that, what are some of the books you're reading? Because I love asking people these things. You can learn a lot about people by the books they're reading. So what books have you got by your bed or that you're reading or listening to at the moment?
Yeah, so I'm a reader. Maybe I've got to get into the audio books because everyone keeps on talking about them, but I love podcasts. So, now I've got to be listening to Leading Your Best Life. That's my new one that I'm going to be listening to, Leigh. So I've got a couple. I've just started this book called The Third Space by Dr. Adam Franks, I think it is. And that's really interesting about the space of what we do in transitions to get not more out of your life, but what it looks like. Just finished a book called Essentialism, and that's all about the disciplined pursuit of less. I'm into doing less rather than more. You seem to be always able to say, how are we going to be better? Well, maybe we need to take some things out of our life. Of course, there's Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Effective Leaders. And that's always a go-to Bible for myself. But of course, I think the shining one that I really took on board and actually reread was Atomic Habits by James Clear. And that is something I actually have reread, but also I've seen there's a few people been interviewing, and he just comes up with some fantastic quotes. And one of them I've actually really grasped onto, and he talks about every positive action you make is a vote for the person you want to be. It's about identity. What's the sort of person that you want to be every day? And if it's a courageous leader, all right, well, what do courageous leaders do? If you want to be that person that can swim Toronto on a solo, well, what do they do? What's the actions you take? Because every time you take one, it's a vote to be that person. So yeah, I've got a lot out of that book. I'm pretty keen on it.
Mate, fantastic. And then, because I'm interested then is what's your reading routine? Do you read in the morning? Do you read at lunchtime? Do you read before you go to sleep? Some people have a reading chair. What's your reading routine? Because again, as you say, if a third of the kids aren't reading, then reading habits and reading routines, daily routines are going to be critical, because it's always so, I want you to read more. Yeah, but how? When do I read? What's my reading space? If I'm going to use Atomic Habits, how do I make it more visible? How do I make it more pleasurable? How do I make it, how do I stack reading with something else? So how do you go about, what are your reading habits?
Yeah, look, I'm not going to say I've got a perfect routine, but there are a couple of times I know I can read. So when I'm on holidays, I really enjoy reading, and I actually get quite involved. I do take time off rather than looking at telly. I'll just say, okay, I'm just going to put some effort into this reading. I do read a little bit at night, Leigh, but it only takes me 1 or 2 pages and I'm asleep. So I love my sleep. I've got a very big routine for sleep. 9 o'clock, I've got to be in bed and ready for the 5:30 morning start the next day. So reading is sort of reading through articles in the books. I sort of chunk it down. I might read on a Saturday afternoon. My wife is a great reader. So when I see her reading, I can sort of sit down and get a bit of that action. But one of the things is I use a Kindle.
Ah, you use a Kindle. So you don't use a book per se, you use a Kindle.
Yeah, I get a lot of books on Kindle. And the reason why I love the Kindle is because as soon as I read something, I highlight it. And I can do 2 things. One, it goes into so for me to be able to come back and just sort of branch over what was in that book that was so important. But the other thing is that I can just click on email. It emails me that passage. Okay, so so it emails me the passage. And what that then tells me is I can either write a blog about it. It's something that I need to put in a presentation maybe I was thinking about, or it's just simply saying, hey, Luke, break this down and maybe put it into an A statement. So that's where I find the Kindle's great, but I also have my other books. And here's another one, the Rules of Life. That's a pretty classic. And there's all sorts of dog ears in there as well. But you've got to go back to it. So it's also trying to contain it. Is because there's lots of information, but try and grab on a few and just work through those.
Brilliant, mate. There's so much great stuff there, particularly positive action is a vote for the person that you want to be. Brilliant. Talk about Halls Creek and Peter McLeod and all the great things you've talked about. Luke, what does the future look like for Luke George in your business?
In my business, I'm pretty excited. Remember, I've done this from a zero to a sale. This one won't be sold. I'm really happy where I am. One day I'll just sort of fade out. But it's taken me a couple of years to understand and where I actually sit in this space. So I'm really happy with. I'm getting a lot more knowledge. I'm far more courageous. I'm happy to speak up and say, well, this is the way I see it due to research from behind me. So I reckon I've got another 10 years and I just feel as if I just want to see more schools and help more educators, because at the end of the day, I'll never lose focus. It's all about the little people and progressing them. And I use the word progress because it doesn't matter where you are. It just is a matter of moving little people forward. And if we can change that stat from 1/3 of children not reading to, 2 children not reading, then that's a magnificent thing. Because in actual fact, the stats show in the research that 97% of children can read, and it's the 3% can't read because they've actually got a learning difficulty. So there's plenty of opportunity to get there.
Well, mate, as we said, one of the great proverbs we use is a French proverb says the forest shapes the tree. So the ecosystem that the child's in is you've got the little person's in, both at home and at school, determines whether they're going to be reading or not. As you say, the talent is already there. It's the ecosystem that needs to be shaped. So, mate, before we move to a close, is there anything I haven't asked you that you'd like to cover before we move into the home straight?
Look, there's just one story about I suppose the defining part in my life that gave me the confidence and the courage to do what I do. And you don't realise it when you're doing it, but when I was a young guy in 1985, I actually rode a bike from Cambridge down to Crete, all through Europe. That was the time of no Google, no phones, and it was just a Michelin map. And just to do that was for no other reason to say, I'm just going to ride this bike. And I didn't go in with any great knowledge. In fact, I went in with pretty well zero. It was literally the shop around the corner. I just bought that bike. There's very little research. But what it proved to me is what you can do, and that belief and that courage. So we have these doubts in ourselves because of the overwhelming barriers to do it. But what I found out when I was younger is if you think it's important, just go for it. and you will find your space. It may take you a bit longer, but you will get there, and people will appreciate it. So I reckon that's where I got the courage. And of course, surfing big waves, you get a lot of courage on those ones.
Oh, mate, the day you said, let's go out 3 bears, and you're running straight across the reef, and I'm going, what the hell? You're walking straight in. But again, you had spent the previous 30 years doing just that, whereas I'd spent 3 minutes doing it. So again, the forest shapes the tree. You'd been out in that surf 1,000 times, and so you got used to it. So just on that, my mate said the other day, Leigh, we're going up to Bali to Lombok. You want to come surfing? And my first reaction was, no, I'm going to be too busy. And then my mate showed me the video of Lombok, and I went, well, hang on, that looks pretty bloody good. And what's stopping me? So the trip's booked, and we're all going up there at the end of April, and we'll be up there for like 10 or so days, you know. And again, I know on surfing trips, on day one, the waves might be holy tornado, but by day 3 or 4, you're going, I can ride these, no problem. So it really is just about acclimatization and getting comfortable being uncomfortable. And obviously, that bike ride of yours, you got comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah, many times. Actually, Leigh, I must remind me of a time where I was at a place called Cliffs, which is in Bali, which is on the bucket around from Ulus. And on Cliffs, you got to walk down like 300 steps to get there. Like, it's a bit of an effort. And I was standing up and I was looking out there, and I actually said to myself, what would Leigh Farnell do right now? And Leigh Farnell would just go and walk those steps to get in those waves, and that's exactly what I did. So you just reminded me of that when you're talking about Lombok. And it's good. Yeah, it's good surf. And I think that's having that space where, you know, let's not block ourselves. Let's just, like you said, well, you know, what's stopping you? Let's just have it a crack. Don't have to go out every day. Just go out some days.
Yeah, mate. FEAR, false evidence appearing real, believing our own bullshit. Luke, there's so much great stuff we've covered today. Not the least of all, just looking at my notes. Surf more. We're both going to be doing that. No problem. Surf more, which really is life by design. We actually talk about that. You know, reverse engineer the life you want, as distinct from just live it and then it's over. Reverse engineer. And the whole idea, as you say, positive action is a vote for the person you want to be. We've talked about world's best practice. We talked about, as you say, going from confused to courageous, a confused peer to a courageous leader, listening, accountability, daily routines. There's all sorts of great things we talked about here, Luke. And again, people can contact you via your website or your LinkedIn, I'm sure. Yeah, is that what you'd like?
100%.
Okay, mate. So I'm just going to go to Luke George, all the articles, great things you've got there. And of course, your LinkedIn as well. So, mate, thank you so much for your time today, Luke. And again, people can touch base, and hopefully we'll do some work together helping leaders in schools and creating fantastic learning ecosystems, whether it be schools or colleges or TAFE or because it's such an important, I mean, really, it's a life-changing part of our existence as education. And I think it was Mark Twain once said, our teacher never knows where their influence finishes, because a lesson can go on, and someone teaches their kids, it's like goodbye, Mr. Chip. So keep making the great waves that you are, Luke, and I look forward to seeing you very soon, mate. Thanks for your time.
No worries. Thanks very much, Leigh. I really enjoyed this session. Thank you.
Thanks, mate. See ya.
See ya.